Hello everyone, my name is Anitsu and I'm back with another Buddyfight video. So recently we just had the Buddyfight championships happen in Japan, and while that was very riveting and exciting to watch, more importantly we got more Buddyfight cards to talk about because they showed more promos. So we already had 2 promos revealed leading up to this, so that just means we have more Buddyfight cards to talk about, which is a really big surprise considering the game is going to be dead basically next year. So yeah, that's just really weird. Anyway, on to looking at the cards. First up, we have Space Dragon Emperor Galgazond Rebuddy. What this card does is his call cost is you put 4 Ancient World monsters with different names from your drop zone into its soul and pay 2 gauge. I don't necessarily think that's pretty hard because there's a whole bunch of different ways of self-milling in Ancient World, so that's not like it's going to be impossible to call. And then what he does is this card on the field cannot be rested, its abilities cannot be nullified, and you cannot take damage by the opponent's card effects. So those are all really, really good and powerful things to have. Just having some basic protections is always very, very good. And then on top of that, when he enters the field, you get to put up to 4 size 2 or less Dragon Lord monsters with Dragon Emperor in its name from your deck and add it to your hand and then shuffle your deck. So on enter, he basically lets you tutor up to 4 cards from your deck, and obviously the targets are more specific, but regardless, just adding 4 cards into your hand is a very, very big deal and a very, very powerful thing. And then on top of which, he has another ability. At the start of each player's turn, you get to put up to 2 size 2 or less monsters with Dragon Emperor in its name from your drop zone into its hand. So not only is he just adding 4 cards to your hand when you play him, he's also going to keep adding back the cards that you most likely grabbed or the cards that he synergizes with from your drop zone to your hand, and that's just really powerful. On top of which, he has quadruple attack, so he could attack 4 times, soul guard, counterattack, and a lifelink of 8 with a whopping 4 crit and some ginormous stats. So he is looking to be one absolute beast of a card. And as far as the cards that he synergizes with, he only really synergizes with these 10 cards, but regardless, these 10 cards are all doing some very, very different things to kind of like toolbox your way to different answers. So you have like life gaining, you have burn damage, you have attack nullifier, you have spell destruction and item destruction, you have just a whole bunch of different abilities that you can use and utilize in combination with him for some really devastating results. So obviously, with the way the state of the game is, you'd probably want to be thinking about the Flame Emperor because you just discard the card and then burn 1 damage to your opponent. You could search out like 4 of him and then burn for 4, then future card Buddyfight on Galgazond and swing for 6, and that's just basically an FTK. And if they don't somehow die, you could keep recycling this for even more burn damage. That's just like an example of what the card is capable of and what the card can do. Next, we have Chibi Panda Rebuddy. So Chibi Panda Rebuddy is pretty interesting because of his counteract ability. So even though it is a once per turn, it's still a very, very powerful ability to have nonetheless, because what it does is you could basically, at counter speed, either discard this card or send this card from the field to the drop zone, and then call a monster with bots and call a monster with Saint in its name from your deck by paying their call costs. He is basically a bots and Saint tutor, and as we already know, those are really, really good, but it's not just adding them to your hand, it's adding them to the field. So that's just really, really powerful because you could get whatever bots you want really quickly and really easily. So Chibi Panda Rebuddy is definitely going to be a really, really good card to look out for. So next we have the ones that were revealed at the event. So first up we have Armor Battle Demon Zeta Rebi. So his call cost is pay 3 gauge. You're probably almost never going to do that. But what you are going to do is transform into him, which it only costs 2 gauge to transform into him. And then he has this nice ability. If you're transformed into this card can't be destroyed. It can't be returned to hand or be rested. And it can't have its abilities be nullified by the opponent's card effects, and then you can't call monsters other than impact monsters, but you can call impact monsters multiple times in one turn. So this is just usual Zeta stuff with more added protection slapped onto the card. But that's really good because ordinarily without Zeta, then you're just limited to one impact call. Being able to do it multiple times is just a very, very good thing. And then whenever an impact monster enters your field, for this turn, this card gets +1 crit. So every time you impact call, he'll just keep getting stronger and stronger, and that could very easily lead to FTK situations where all you need to do is just impact call enough, and then boost his crit, and then swing for a lot of damage. And then on top of all that, he has triple attack, so he could hit for an absolute buttload of damage depending on how the turns go. So overall, I think Armored Battle Demon Zeta is definitely a really solid card compared to a lot of what he was doing before. He's kind of not really doing anything different, but he's just decently good with the additions that he did get. Next up, we have Demon Lord Gognar Ribi. So, Demon Lord Gognar is a pretty solid card considering his call cost is just a normal call cost, nothing strange about it. You just pay 2 gauge and put the top card of your deck into its soul. And then he has the Dark Vortex ability, which is really, really good. So when this card enters the field, you basically return all cards from both players' gauge into their deck, and then you shuffle their deck. And then if you returned 2 or more of the opponent's gauge, then you get to charge 3 of your gauge. So this is really good because it is effectively taking away the opponent's gauge, and then if the opponent had gauge, then you just charge 3, so you're technically plussing 1 on your gauge while taking away the opponent's gauge. So that's just, again, really good because resource denial is always very, very good. Making it harder for them to play or even defend is just, just a very solid strategy in general. And then he even has a counteract ability where during the turn you get to play rock, paper, scissors, and then if you win, then he gets plus 10,000 power and triple attack, and then you could only use this once per turn, and then he naturally has penetrate, soul guard, and lifelink of 2. So I actually hate his counteract ability. I think it's really bad because you have to play a game of chance. So it's like, oh, you might get it, you might not. So it doesn't really matter, his counteract ability. It's nice if it could go off because then he's a 4 crit with triple attack and a lot of extra power. But I wouldn't expect that to go off. But most of the time, you're really just using him for his resource denial ability, and that's kind of just it. But the interesting thing to note is this is a not hard once per turn ability. So if the opponent manages to gain gauge during your turn, you could still try to take away their gauge. So that's just something really interesting to think about, and I think he is definitely going to be a really solid card for the decks that want to run him, or could run him. Next up, we have Demon Wolf Fenrir Ribi. So his call cost is pay 4 gauge. He'll almost never do that. And then when this card is dropped from your hand, you could pay 2 gauge. If you do, call this card from your drop zone without paying its call cost, and then its size becomes 0 until it leaves the field. So, like I said, you're never going to hard call it. You're always going to be discarding it to pay 2 gauge to call it instead. Which, that's not necessarily a bad thing to do, considering Legend World has a whole bunch of ways of discarding the card. And then at the end of battle that this card attacked, if you have no cards in your hand this turn, this card gets triple attack. So I don't necessarily think that you're going to be able to give him triple attack very often, but the fact that he is just easier to play with a whopping 6 crit and a lot of additional power and defense is definitely nothing to really scoff at. So I think he's definitely going to be a really interesting card. I just don't think he's going to be a super viable one that you want to play, but he's still pretty good considering he becomes a size 0 and has a whopping 6 crit. That's really all you need out of him for a lot of different Legend World decks. And then lastly, we have Death Ruler Daredevil Ribi. So this is a card that was originally from the Dark Chronicles manga. So it's definitely nice to see him again. And he definitely is looking to be pretty interesting in his own right. So he has Shadow Dive. So that means he could attack through the opponent's center. That's pretty normal for Death Rulers. And then he has the Thundermine ability because he's also a 100 demon, where when your opponent's monster is destroyed, you could drop up to 2 cards from your opponent's deck, and then you deal 1 damage to the opponent. So he kind of fits into a little bit of a mill strategy on top of burning the opponent 1. That's just not bad. And then when this card attacks, if there's 20 or more cards in the opponent's drop zone, then you get to destroy all cards on your opponent's field, and this card gets +3 crit. So if the opponent has 20 or more cards in their drop zone, then he is going to swing for a very, very devastating 4 crit and attempts to blow up the opponent's field. That's just pretty good overall. I don't know exactly how good he's going to be in the grand scheme of things, but like those aren't all bad things to have. And he's definitely going to be a very, very interesting card to mess around with and potentially build a new decks with. So that's kind of it for all of the promos that we have revealed recently. We still have even more promos to think about, which is kind of weird for the game being ending in July. But the really unfortunate thing is I have no idea how or if the English version of the game is going to be getting any of these promos, because we only have so much months left and we only have so many promos. And we have more promos than we do months left, so I honestly have no idea how or if we're going to be getting any of these, which is pretty unfortunate because some of these cards are really, really good and some players really, really want them. But I have no idea what JP Bushy is even thinking about because, like, I don't know, like they have held back really important promos before and it just really sucks, and I just think JP Bushy hates the English side. I have no idea. But that's all I really have to say for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, feel free to like, share, and subscribe for more content. And I will see you in the next video.